Hey everybody, we're going to continue talking about Darwin today. And the lecture question I asked you last time was if Darwin and Wallace both talked about evolution through natural selection, why is it that Darwin is best remembered for the theory? And it's really because of the overwhelming amount of evidence that he had when he published. And so he had all this evidence to support his viewpoints. And his main viewpoints were that history of life is like a tree with lots of branches over time, but everything comes from a common ancestor. And so that diversity of life is caused by the forks from the common ancestor. So here's an example of his tree with your common ancestor and all the different branch points that come from that ancestor. So the Origin of Species documented the occurrence of evolution, but that had been done before by Lamarck. What was really important was that it suggested the mechanism for evolution, which is natural selection. Now, Darwin talked about four major observations. The first is that members of a population often vary greatly in their traits. Now, this observation is one that you can make on a daily basis whenever you look at a certain population, whether it's people or plants or animals, whatever you're looking at, you can tell that not every person looks the same, not every tree looks the same. And so you can actually see a lot of variation when you look at different populations. Observation 2 should sound fairly familiar because we just finished talking about Mendel, but this is that traits are inherited from parents to offspring. Observation 3, we talked about in class as well. All species are capable of producing more offspring than their environment can support. And this observation had a tight link to human populations we talked about last time. Thomas Malthus had written about how human populations were producing more people than can survive. And then observation 4, owing to lack of food or other resources, many of these offspring do not survive. So there you go, 3 and 4 are tied together. So you've got more individuals being produced than the environment can support. And so because of that, many of the offspring that are produced will not survive. Now, we've got several inferences based on these four observations. The first is that individuals whose inherited traits give them a higher probability of surviving and reproducing in a given environment tend to leave more offspring than other individuals. Now, if you wanted to think about this in a human standpoint, if you've got genes that, provide for a certain amount of health, then you will live longer and probably reproduce more. And so you would tend to pass on more of your genes to more offspring than somebody who had genes that led to poorer health. Inference 2 is the unequal ability of individuals to survive and reproduce will lead to the accumulation of favorable traits in the population over generations. So the individuals that are best suited to their environment will reproduce more, they'll have more offspring, and because of that, they are that's leading to an accumulation of those favorable traits within the population because the individuals that have those good traits are reproducing more and leaving more offspring that have those good traits. So what is it that determines what characteristics are favorable? Well, with natural selection, it's nature. So nature determines which characteristics are favorable, and this can change. It can change if the local environment in an area changes, then what's favorable will change based on nature. So it's nature who determines who survives, and that is why we call it natural selection. So we also have something called artificial selection, and this is when man determines the characteristics that survive and reproduce. And so common examples of this are going to be anytime we look at breeds of animals or we look at any type of domesticated plant or animal. And the example here is mustard plant, and so here is the original mustard plant, and here are all the different cultivars that come from this. So you got Brussels sprouts and broccoli and cauliflower and all kinds of stuff. We also have pesticide resistance. So here we have a bunch of individual insects, and you can kind of see there's a chromosome on there. Most of the insects have the green gene, and then this guy right here has the red gene. Well, when insecticide is applied, all of the insects with the green gene will be affected by the insecticide and they will die. The red gene is for insecticide resistance. This is a random mutation that this insect just happens to have. When the insecticide is applied and everybody else dies, any individuals that have the red gene are still alive, they survived, and now they will reproduce and they will essentially pass on this gene. And so now you have this generation of insects that all contain the insecticide resistance gene. So what is how is evolution measured? How do we know if something is successful evolutionarily? Well, we can look at survival and reproduction. So whoever lives long enough and has enough kids, essentially, is the winner in evolution. So in order for natural selection to work, you have to have a couple things. You have to have variation within a population. Like with the insects, you had to have the insect that had the different gene for the insecticide resistance. So you need to have variation within a population, and according to Darwin, you need to have long periods of time. Understand, though, that long is a relative term. So something, if you're looking at a species like humans that have a much older age for maturation and reproductive age, you need a much longer period of time. If you're looking at something like fruit flies that reproduce fairly quickly, you're not going to need as long to watch evolution occur. So some of the subtleties of natural selection, population are the units of evolution. So an individual cannot evolve. An entire species may not actually be evolving. It would be individual populations of a species that would evolve. And then only inherited characteristics can evolve. So you can't pass on acquired traits. That was the whole flaw with Lamarck's view of evolution. So it's only traits that you have genes for that can evolve. So your lecture question for today, how do acquired traits allow a species to evolve outside of natural selection? So we know that you have to have the genes for a certain trait in order for the genes to be passed on, in order for evolution to work. But is there a way for things to evolve outside of natural selection? Is it even possible? And what are some acquired characteristics that would allow that to happen? So that's your lecture question for today. So please shoot me an answer via the class website, and I'll see you later. Thanks, guys.